Welcome to the 6th episode of Eastern Renaissance Recaps from Reality TV Warriors. My name is Michael Harmstone, and joining me as always for our 250th episode together is the Canadian who hides whenever he hears the voices of anyone he knows, Logan Saunders.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We are back to our normal Sunday recording schedule, which is nice. Gives us a little bit of speed between actually watching the episode and talking about it. Not that there's much to talk about.
You know how some people, when they talk about their favorite shows, or their shows that aren't as much of a favorite of theirs anymore, and they say, oh, this episode, like shows that get into their later seasons and say, oh, this episode was a real snoozer. Well, this last episode truly was a snoozer for me, because I watched it after I had a long day yesterday. I went to a baby shower, and then I had to teach for about 11 hours. Yeah, I think I taught about 22 different kids. And then I watched Vidum, and the episode bored me so much that I actually fell asleep for about 20 minutes of the 55 minutes running time. And I woke up, and I'm like, oh, wow, how is the second person already being executed? I don't remember a quiz. I don't remember the final wrap-up to the challenge. So I remember I would fall asleep for 2 10-minute spots is what I discovered. So I had to backtrack that after I saw the second execution. And then I watched through it and I'm thinking, this is why I fell asleep. This episode truly qualifies as a snoozer because I snoozed through it.
Do you remember last week when I said that the 3 potential options for how this episode was going to go down was either they get it over with really quickly and then we have an execution, then we have another couple of challenges, or they maybe do the end of the challenge and then the execution and then one more challenge and then the execution, or it rolls into the finale, or alternatively they could spend the entire episode on the conclusion of this challenge and it will be an utter bore fest. Guess what happened, guys? We don't go in on mole seasons very much. I will be perfectly honest. There is only one mole season I know that I have gone in on these podcasts. This episode was, I would say, the most boring mole episode we have ever talked about. It's so boring, Logan doesn't have a single note.
Because I figured it's just very general observations I have about this episode and who our final suspects are heading into what could be the finale, which is another subject to talk about that annoys me.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I remember the main headlines for this episode. We could just cover it right now and say...
it's a 10-minute episode.
Yeah. I just don't have too much... because I did the math afterwards. Most Vidum episodes have a running time of about 61 minutes, I think.
Yeah, somewhere between about 60 and 65 normally.
Yeah. This one, the total running time was 55 minutes. Which, when I saw it, I'm thinking, this is really short for Vidum or Belgi. I don't recall a single time they've ever been... I think the shortest episode I could recall off the top of my head was 59 minutes. But 55, I'm thinking, oh no, do they just only do this one? It's not even one full challenge, it's half of the challenge. We get to see half of the challenge for the whole episode. And what makes it even worse is that there's no fun scenes or even a smaller game leading up to the quiz. It's just, as soon as the challenge ends, two of the duos, the two coalitions briefly share information, and then both coalitions take the quiz, and we go straight into the execution. So it really is just half a challenge, quiz, execution for 55 minutes.
I think if I hadn't been warned that it was just going to be the rest of the challenge all episode, then I would have been a bit more annoyed when I watched it. Thankfully, someone did warn me on Instagram last night that it was literally just the other half of the challenge. But it is glacially paced. It is so slow.
Well, I did the math too on it. It was what, 6? We got to see the last 6 hours, right? They fast forwarded to the final 5 hours and 47 minutes of the challenge, I think. And about 45 minutes of the episode is dedicated to what happens in a 5 hour and 47 minute time period, which is a huge percentage for reality TV.
So, Previously, the final 6 had to direct each other around Pisa, but after Nikkie and Tygo disappeared, the other 4 had a bigger task, finding them within a day, or 2 of the 4 of them would go home. And we ended the episode with them finding out that they need to go to the island of Elba. And I love how Rick doesn't even acknowledge the first challenge of last episode. He does not want to talk about the Boxes on the Beach challenge. It's just completely forgotten. And something I do have to mention before we actually start this episode proper, I know we've already ranted for 10 minutes, is that this is actually our 50th episode that we've recorded this year. Obviously, it's not the 50th released yet, but it is the 50th one we've recorded as a team this year.
Awesome. We're productive.
So it's a small positive for this really boring episode, I'll be honest.
Does it count as a full episode podcast when we're probably going to be done in about 15 minutes?
It's a half podcast, but my spreadsheet doesn't go to halves, so we're just doing full numbers.
Round up?
Yeah. It's essentially the podcast equivalent of adding a challenge with 1,222,050 euros.
So, I mean, one thing we have to give production credit for is no idea like this has ever been attempted. And it's an all-star season. Like when you have an all-star season, you're allowed to experiment with certain twists to see if they'll work out because all-star seasons are gimmicky to begin with. So yes, they're allowed to do a twist like this where they have a really elaborate full-length challenge that takes over a day to complete. So I applaud them for trying to experiment to see how this would play out. Unfortunately, it should be a twist that should never, ever, ever be repeated.
Yeah. Kudos to production for trying this twist, but not kudos to production for realizing why they shouldn't have tried this twist.
They really wanted to go full out with an adventure task, and this is really outside of the usual budget for Vidum. They don't incorporate a long helicopter ride, give teams a stipend to get by for a couple days, let them go out for dinner, and they let them win a huge chunk of money in this challenge.
Yeah, the thing you've got to bear in mind is that this season is really short anyway. It's 8 episodes rather than the normal 10. And we're not 100% whether it's actually going to be 7 rounds of play. But they've only got enough challenges for 7 of those 8 episodes. So they just have to kind of work out a weird split where it ends up with this one being really glacially paced.
And you don't exactly, out of the 6 people that are left, you don't have your best 4 to carry the episode because 2 of the characters we don't see. We don't see Nikkie and we don't see Tygo for... It was really tough to not mention it to you, Michael, before you had a chance to watch the episode because I was thinking you really notice Tygo and Nikkie's absences when you're watching characters that are probably 4 of the more under-edited characters of the whole season. Because we've lost Ellie Lust, who was always big on airtime. Horace usually got a big chunk of airtime. I guess those would be the 2 biggest characters that have been eliminated so far that previously had the most airtime. Those were the last 2 executions, I think.
Yeah, as much as I obviously adore taking the piss out of Tygo is a big character in any scene. For better or for worse, Tygo is a big character. Nikkie is a massive character. In every scene she's in, Nikkie is the center of attention. Having those 2 people be basically locked in a cage for 45 minutes of a 55-minute episode is a bad production decision.
And then after the challenge is over, you can't show them because they're both exempt. They're both exempt and 2 other people are going home, so there's no reason. You can't really show Nikkie and Tygo when you have huge stakes for what's about to go down in the final 5 minutes of the episode.
Especially when you consider that it is looking increasingly likely that one of those 2 people is going to be the mole. But that's an argument we're going to have fairly soon, because I suspect one of those 2 people may be the mole now. So, Rick introduces the episode by saying that in Vs to Mole, everyone does everything to find the mole, the saboteur, and stay in the game. The 4 who were left off the island of Elba want the double execution to be with 6 of them, but Nikkie and Tygo would rather be safe. But the question is whether everyone will forget that there is a mole amongst them. And as much as obviously we're going to moan about this episode a lot, I do quite like the split group photo. I like them playing with our perceptions on that. And the episode title is Damocles, as in the sword of. And we begin on day 12 proper in Piombino with the group of 4 eating breakfast. Your reminds us that if they don't find Nikkie and Tygo, 2 of them will go home. And this is one of my absolute bugbears, especially recently, is them repeating in a confessional what we just got told 30 seconds beforehand. We're fully aware of that.
And what happened the entire second half of the previous episode. That's the crazy part, is that it's not even that one challenge occupies an entire episode. It's that this challenge already occupied about 40% of the previous episode, and I guess if you want to include the prelude with the drive to Rick, that it's closer to 75% of the episode if of last week's episode if you include both elements to the challenge. Because it's crazy to think that the drive they did last round was technically part of this challenge, because that's how they get Nikkie and Tygo isolated. And then they get told, hey, now the time limit is 24 hours. And we see, what, 16 or 17 of those hours play out last week. And then this week, we get the final 5.5 hours of the challenge, and they stretch it out to the full 45 minutes.
And Euron also says that he got to the point where he'd rather do a 6-person execution than find the money on the island of Elba. And we also learn that apparently Napoleon was poisoned by the wallpaper in his house on Elba.
Maybe it's like Willy Wonka. The snozberries taste like snozberries. Oh no, the poisonberries taste like poisonberries.
And they decide that they're going to go for clues first and then money. And there are 2 phones left over from the car challenge, so they will need to split up into pairs. And with just under 6 hours to go, they drive to the ferry. There is a storm brewing, and a noise scares them as they board the boat, which really makes me laugh.
This is some of the worst weather we've ever seen in the filming of Vidum or any mole season worldwide.
I just think it's really, really funny that they've put these brilliant plans into place of having like Nikkie and Tygo flying over on a helicopter and having a ferry ride, and then they get biblically bad weather. It's just awful, awful weather for them. Like, imagine if this had happened the day before and Nikkie and Tygo couldn't have flown in the helicopter. How the hell would they have got them to Elba?
This is the 3rd episode with really bad weather.
Funnily enough, this is why you don't film in Europe in November. Who'd have thunk?
Yeah, I think if I recall correctly, you pretty much avoid everywhere in Europe during November if you want to travel. It's low season for a reason.
This is why when we were trying to think of anywhere in the world that we could go in November this year, given that we can't fly anywhere really, we both kind of avoided this area of the world.
Yeah, this is, even if they waited till when was I in Italy? And when I was there in February and the weather was awesome. I think you just got to get past November. It seems even Greece has really rainy weather in November, I was reading. And I think almost every country in Europe, it seems like November's just the worst.
I mean, when Patrick's opening the door, he pretty much gets his arm ripped out the socket by the wind.
Or when they try to walk out onto the deck of the ferry.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He opens the door for everyone, and then as he's closing it, he just kind of gets dragged along with it like he's having a Trump handshake. And that is our banner for this week, I'm going to warn you now, because it did make me laugh.
Yeah, it made me laugh too.
And Peggy gets nauseous, and it doesn't affect Ron at all. That's literally the end of that scene.
Did the contestants have fun with this challenge, you think?
I don't think so. I'll be honest, I don't think any of them particularly enjoyed it.
I wonder if it's just a mix of really, really bad weather and just, I mean, they're all Vidum veterans by now. I think Ron just earned that label. But when you contrast to all the challenge they do, like the excitement they have for, say, the laser game and all of these other really exciting, bustling challenges where you get to go around the villages and scramble for an hour here and there, and then you get to go back to your hotel and chill out or do who knows what. But here they're just stuck on ferries, trying to run around for 5 or 6 hours in nasty weather, figure out some of these puzzles, know that no matter what, they're going to have to participate in the double execution. I can see it not being the fact that they just drove across half of Italy the day before probably didn't help things too much.
I think it's a combination of the fact that it's been a really long day for them anyway, because they started with the second challenge in the farmhouse, then immediately went into the 24 hours and being told that they had the double execution. The stress of the potential double execution that was going to feature them regardless, and the stress of it being between the four of them if they didn't find Nikkie and Tico, and then the stress of driving all day, for Peggy at least, to get to Piombino, then having to try and work out the clues and find food and find lodging, and then wake up early in the morning, stress about actually what they were going to find that day, then making their way to the ferry weather being terrible, the weather on the island of Elba being biblically bad, having to run around doing a challenge to even have a chance of finding Nikkie and Tico, then being told that they didn't find Nikkie and Tico in time, and then having to do a double execution. They would have been absolutely shattered by the end of that pair of days.
Wonder how much rest they're going to give them after this execution. If it's like what they're only like 15 days, 14 days into this.
Day 13, the execution was.
Day 13. No. So I mean, if next week's the final round of play, they could potentially be done in 14 or 15 days. And the fact that one challenge occupied a day and a half of that filming schedule.
So, yeah, when they get to the island of Elba, we find out that this challenge is actually worth €4,500 potentially. And I do love how they had to highlight the letters Elba in the challenge name, just in case we missed it, because they highlight it in green.
So, who ends up with the two phones? Rowan and Patrick?
Yeah, so that's Rowan and Patrick, both of whom carry a phone.
I gotta say, Patrick trying to call the phone and then they hear the other phone in Rowan's pocket may or may not be one of my favorite facial reactions ever.
It was pretty close to being Albano this week, I'm not going to lie.
They're like, wait, why is there a phone? I don't see anyone nearby. Why is there another phone going off? Oh, shit. Imagine if Ellie was there.
It's just the look of absolute abject terror on their faces, and then they just start absolutely wetting themselves.
Well, because at that point, there's nothing they can do, really. It's like, yeah, we have the map, we have the two phones, and we have the easier route to go.
And by the time they get to the island, Peggy also seems to be the only person who actually wants to get money in the challenge. And they decide to split up, with Peggy and Ron going to the harbour to pick up money and a towel for the clue, and Patrick and Jeroen to go to Fortestella for the clue. And a local asks Patrick and Jeroen if they got an umbrella and says it's a bad idea to come to Elba without one. And Patrick just says, "We're Dutch." And at Fortestella, Patrick and Jeroen find a bag of mole coins, each worth €50, and a note saying you don't have to throw it in. And I did notice that the map that they received the previous day was utterly ruined by the time that they get to the fort.
Because of the rain?
Yeah, it was falling apart by the time they were huddling under that entrance to the fort.
It's a mixture of rain and sweat from them running around.
And in the fountain at the fort is a key, which they will need later, but sadly they miss. And at the Martello Tower, Peggy and Ron find a clock with 12 words. The place where 6 heads get together brings you closer to the solution. Patrick and Jeroen then head to Villa Molini, Napoleon's house. Jeroen's bag nearly knocks over a Napoleon statue, but they don't spot the bag of money that is perched underneath it. Patrick eventually spots it on a second look, and it is more mole coins, each worth €100 this time. And Patrick also says it's very estimal to know where you're looking, but not what for. And then, as you mentioned, Patrick rings the others, and Jeroen's pocket rings because he has the other phone. And they absolutely start wetting themselves. Then Peggy spots their first money bag underneath the bell with 6 heads. When you have the highest need, your saviour is near, is the note that they receive. And Patrick and Jeroen walk back to the square to see if Ron and Peggy are there, but of course they're not. And Ron tells Peggy to leave the money that they were going for, even though they have no idea of whether the other two are still going for it. Patrick and Jeroen thankfully do check it anyway and find another bag of money. They finally meet up at the harbour. Peggy says she's never been happier to hear Patrick's voice.
You keep going.
I was going to say, it was getting to the point where you were probably going to be really sad to keep hearing my voice, so I thought I'd actually let you potentially chip in.
Oh, no, you can do it. I have no other observation. I have one major observation that I want to talk about with... Actually, let's just talk about that right now, because there's fuck all else to talk about with this challenge. So, where did the saw come from for Nikkie and Tygo? Like, were they working on this for hours and hours? Because I feel like that's a detail that should have been explained to the viewers and to the contestants at the start. Is that wherever Nikki and Tigo are, that they're given a saw to slowly work through the chains? I think it almost seems like they want the challenge to fail even more if they didn't plan on the saw initially and then suddenly, oh, let's give Nikki and Tigo a saw, and if they escape, then they also get exempt. I'm thinking this just puts it too much into there's too much of an advantage for Nikki and Tigo by giving them the saw.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued to find out what the time frame was of Nikki and Tico's challenge here. Were they given a strict 2 hours or whatever before the challenge ended? Because it seemed really easy for them to win it if they were just given a saw with 6 hours notice and go, you know what, guys, just free yourselves, you can get out.
The other four bored us too much with this challenge. We want both of you to be in the final four, guaranteed.
Yeah.
That's how it came off to me. I'm thinking you can't just give people an additional way to escape the challenge that wasn't specified beforehand.
If this was Amazing Race, and I don't defend Amazing Race very often anymore, they would have been given like a stiletto with a block of ice and a key to the lock or something. They needed to get a little bit more creative than just say, here's a saw, work out how to cut through 3 chains with it, and you're free.
That's a good point with Vidum and the mole in general, is that if they do add another element to the challenge, Rick is usually there to present it. It somehow fits in thematically with the challenge. There's also another dilemma involved. Say, it can be a simple one like they use in the American version. Oh, if you use the saw to cut yourself out, 2,000 euros is deducted from the pot. But just know you're taking 2,000 euros from the pot.
Here's what I would have done. I would have given them an absolute fuckload of keys and said, you've got to unlock all 3 of these chains. Give them thousands of keys and 2 hours to work it out and see if they can work it out between them.
Yeah, Saw just seems so, I don't know, just basic and just such a rushed idea. There's just so many better options on the table for that extra elements that Nikki and Tigo could have done. Were they just complaining about being bored to production the whole time? And production's like, here's the saw, knock yourself out.
I wonder, given how wet the floor of the cell was by the time that that Patrick actually reached it, I wonder whether the weather played into it. Whether they'd thought of a brilliant challenge at Fort Falcone to really test them, and then because of the howling wind and rain, it was miserable for them to even be in that cell, so they just broke glass for emergency saw. Because that saw just seemed like something the art department would have had lying around, and they just thought, let's just use this as a quick way to get rid of this. Let's reduce their time limit to actually get out. Let's just give them a saw and see what they can do.
But the thing is that they didn't escape until the time limit anyway.
No, it was, as we guessed last week, actually artificially quite close. We don't actually know how long they had after they ran off before Patrick got there.
Well, we know that it's at least that it was a 24-hour challenge and that they didn't escape until 23 hours and 51 minutes into it.
Well, do we really, though?
Yeah, I know, but that's what the edit makes it seem to be. We don't know what else to go off on.
Someone by the name of Logan Saunders hypothesized last week that they're going to make it seem a lot closer than it was. I happen to believe that maybe they escaped in the last hour, but it probably wasn't 8 minutes before the end.
Yeah. And then I hope what wasn't misleading about the edit is that them not having that key and having to backtrack for 45 minutes for it is what truly made the difference.
Yeah, I think it probably was, but I don't think it was nearly as close as they made it look.
Well, Rick at the execution said that Nikki and Tigo escaped just in the nick of time. But is he doing that for the TV audience or to make the contestants feel better? I don't know. But I just hope that at least the whole key thing wasn't a big misleading piece of edit. Yeah, red herring, exactly. I want that to at least make the difference.
I think it was quite telling that we didn't have a clock on the screen when Nikki and Tico escaped, like we did when the group got to the door and found out that they needed a key for it, or when they came back to the door with the key and got through it. It was telling that there wasn't a clock there. It was sometime between those things, but I don't think it was nearly as close as they may have made it seem. It's the old Amazing Race adage of unless you see them in the same frame, they're probably not there at the same time.
I was thinking what they really should have done for the challenge is Nikki and Tigo escape from the cell, but the contestants can still try and spot them on the island. I think just saying that, oh, because the way the edit made it seem is that if Nikki and Tigo escape the cell, then they're exempt. Although no, they had to like try and hide somewhere, so that's not really it either. So they were allowed to be spotted.
What they should have done is put laser guns at the top of the fort and said, if you shoot Nikki and Tico, they're not exempt.
Yeah, they could have done another extra thing like, oh, Nikki and Tigo escaped. Now you have half an hour to try and track them down using these extra supplies. That would have been great because then you have this whole suspenseful part of okay, you did screw up with not finding them on time, but if you want two people to be exempt into the final four, they're gonna have to work that extra bit harder to evade you. And then say if you catch Nikki and Tigo, 3,000 euros goes into the pot. However, maybe they did have something like that planned, but as we know, the weather was atrocious and probably made it not a possibility.
Yeah, I wonder how much of an impact the weather actually had on this challenge. I think this challenge was probably hampered by the fact that the weather was so disgusting.
And it's not the first challenge. It's not the first challenge where they've had to run around in disgusting weather.
So they combine their clues to work out Fort Falcone, which is where Tico and Nikki are chained, and they have to sword themselves free. The door on either side of their cell is chained using the one attached to them. If they escape the cell, then they escape the double execution, and there is only obviously enough slack in the chains to keep the doors closed, so they do need to release all three in order to be able to escape. And with 2 hours to go at 10:30 in the morning, they head to the theatre where another clue awaits, which is put everything in order to find the right spots and a silhouette of Napoleon pointing at Nikki and Tico. And the really irritating thing is, we have no idea what the solution was for this. It certainly made it look like if they solved it correctly, a film would play, giving them a hint, but they work it out kind of by the highest point and the Falcon clue rather than actually the theatre clue. And it's really frustrating. We never find out what the clue was meant to be.
If only they had enough airtime to be able to present that information.
I know they were just rushing through everything in this episode. I had to sit down because of how rapidly paced it was. It was really weird. So inside the theatre, there are some cards on the chairs. Ron also finds some money hidden in the chairs. He speculates that they have to remember which seats they found money in order to be able to solve the clue.
Ron is really cursed by theaters.
He really is, but Ron is also cursed by only 4 people being vulnerable for elimination, which is something that really amused me and I didn't twig it last week. Ron went home in Georgia.
Not in Georgia, though.
Yeah. Ron went home in the Georgia season when only 4 people were vulnerable to go home at the first execution. And it happens again here. He goes home in an execution where only 4 people are vulnerable.
3.
No, 4. It's not exactly the same as Georgia, where only 3 people were actually vulnerable. This time, 4 people are. So they ask the man in the theatre what the bird is in their clue. He doesn't know, but identifies Fort Falcone as the highest point. They then make the link of Falcon being the bird on the back of the clue. And Tico and Nikki hear the other 4's voices and hide. They can't get to the fort, though, because they missed the key at the first location. And they've got an hour to find it and run back. Ron finds a clue in the theatre saying, is Napoleon the key to the story, in one of the chairs. Peggy tries calling them, but of course they don't answer. Nikki and Tico manage to remove one of the chains, and they finally figure out the tactic with like 45 minutes to go. Patrick finds the key in the fountain by ignoring Jeroen and spots the missed call, and they all head back to the fort. Nikki and Tico cut their second chain. Their key unlocks the small door on the fort with 9.5 minutes left, and Nikki and Tico escape their cell after cutting the third lock and have to hide from the rest in the fort. They leave through the front gates and make their escape. Patrick finds their cut chains and realizes that they're too late, and he says that he could hurt some people right now. And Nikki and Tico cheer that they are in the finale, both celebrate making it further than they did last time. And Nikki and Tico's escape means that the double execution will be between just the other 4. They earned €3,400 of a possible $4,500 for the challenge and episode, and €11,510 of a possible €31,172.50 for the season so far.
Not a bad percentage.
Not a bad percentage. It rapidly shot up thanks to this challenge.
I guess production realized, well, we kind of have to make it easier for them to get money.
And Patrick and Peggy form a mini bond to try and get through the execution together. Rowan says spreading is suddenly very dangerous, and he's going all in on Nikkie. And then they drive themselves back onto the ferry, where the test takes place. It is now time for the test. 20 questions on the identity and actions of the mole. The two people who know the least about the mole will go home, except for the mole, who's gone home before, but can't go home this time. Nikkie and Tygo literally escaped the execution, so will be part of the final four. Patrick says he has only one suspect, which is Peggy. That's why he wanted to share a car with her. Peggy says you now can't spread. It's time to take a leap of faith. She suspects Ron, and that means it's a 2 out of 3 chance of leaving. Ron says it could be anyone. Patrick yelled down the mole at the beach. Rowan put money away at the chains. It could be Peggy because she blames everyone else. It could be Tygo because he's an actor. And it could be Nikkie because she slows everyone down. And Rowan suspects Nikkie because she's quite vague and never participates. Everywhere she goes, weird things happen. Nikkie and Tygo get the Elimination memorial chairs at the execution. Rick says that they escaped in the nick of time, meaning the double execution is between the other four. Patrick gets an instant red. He says, damn it, in English, and has to go right away. Tygo looks genuinely upset that he went out, just as if Patrick had taken his last source of food. Rowan gets a green screen before Peggy also gets a green screen, sending Ron home. And we didn't get to see his suspect, which is odd. Patrick went going all in on Peggy, and Peggy was safe going all in on Ron. And next time, Scrabble wine barrels, a mine train, and what appears to be a complete rehash of the challenge from episode 1 in the castle, but in an abbey this time. And there is actual confirmation of a final 3.
Okay.
So now the important bit where you can actually contribute instead of it just being 57 minutes of me talking again. Number 1, will everyone do all 3 challenges?
I think so. I get the feeling we're going to get the reveal at the end of episode 8.
Because there's now 2 schools of thought. It's either reveal at the end of episode 8 and there is no reunion, which I wouldn't be opposed to because, there's a massive dearth of challenges this week. We need to actually bring the average back up. And the maximum pot is really, really, really low currently. And the other school of thought is that there's going to be one challenge with the 4 of them, then another execution mid-episode, then another 2 challenges, and then the Wie is de Mol find out next week moment, and then a reunion in week 8.
Yeah, coronavirus sort of throws all that into doubt.
Well, they still had the China reunion, didn't they? They just had a closed set for it, which they could do again.
Yeah, but that was before coronavirus became coronavirus, yeah.
The thing that maybe points towards the latter is the fact that only the Memory Walk challenge is shown with all 4 people participating. We see absolutely nothing of the other 2 challenges and anyone participating in them.
Yeah, I guess they still have to do the reveal and then the sabotages. Like, they never exclude that in any season, do they?
No. It's just interesting that they still haven't actually confirmed whether there's going to be a reunion. Because there's absolutely no point advertising a reunion like they normally would, because usually there's obviously people in Fondle Park to cheer on the reveal.
It would just be so depressing if next week is the last round of play, because that means 1.5 of 7 rounds of play was dedicated to one challenge.
Yeah, the thing is, the maximum pot now after 6 episodes is actually pretty much around the level that the average Belgian mole winner takes home.
That's nuts.
We're on €31,172.50 so far.
And the pots, the pot that they could win is lower than what most American mole season pots are after 1 episode.
Yeah, but to be fair, that's a maximum of $1 million normally. You can't really compare those.
Yeah.
So China after 5 episodes was 31,460. But that was halfway through their season.
Yeah, that's what makes it tougher if there's only 1 round of play left. It's just such a low pot that they could possibly take home. The worst part about this double execution is that my top 2 suspects took the quiz and both of them survived. I'm thinking that's just nasty. That does not help me at all.
I think we're going to strongly disagree on the next question. Do you think the mole took the test?
I think so, and this is why. It would be a terrible production decision to sit out the mole for an episode and a half.
It would, and I do not disagree at all. But can you really make an argument after the rest of this season so far that there have not been some terrible production decisions? Because I can't. And also, this was by far the most lucrative challenge that they've had as a team, which suggests that nobody was actually moling.
But there's a lot of moly things that happen, though.
Yeah, but the thing is, as I said last week, the mole's main focus is keeping money out the pot. The mole does not give two shits whether the double execution is between 4 people and 6 people. They couldn't care less about that. The mole's sole focus, if they are in that team of 4, is making sure money does not get in the pot. And the mole, if they were in that 4, spectacularly failed at that aspect of their role. So the only logical explanation for me is that the mole was not in that final 4.
But then that means for an episode and a half, the mole wasn't in a position to keep money out of the pot, which would be so lame.
It would, and I would not be shocked at all if that is what happened. That's what it boils down to. I cannot see how the mole could have been in that group of 4 when they earned so much money in that challenge. That is the most lucrative Vidum challenge for years.
Yeah, it's just... Yeah, this episode just leaves a bad taste in my mouth from start to finish. And most of that was from my own drool from falling asleep.
In terms of solely money, they earned more in that challenge than they have earned in pretty much any other challenge in Vidum for, I'd say, 3 years.
But what about for an episode, though? This is what they earned for an episode and a half. I don't think... You can't really say, oh, this is the most money they earned for one challenge. Well, what if they do this twist again and it lasts for 2.5 episodes? And there's one challenge that lasts 2.5 episodes and they win 5,000 or 6,000 euros. Of course they'll have to win that because it went on for so damn long.
Yeah, but it was one challenge. They won more in that challenge than anything else.
But you have to look at it as how much money did they earn over the span of an episode and a half? They earned 3,400 euros, or for almost 2 episodes. Like an episode and 3/4, they earned 3,400 euros, which I think that would be close to being on par for Vidum.
In this challenge alone, they earned 76% of the episode total. Regardless of how much was actually on offer, they earned 76% of the max they could have earned for both the challenge and the episode here.
Yeah, I don't know. There's no easy way of looking at this. It's such a mess. It's so unorthodox.
There really isn't, because the two schools of thought, ironically actually represented by both of us, is the mole was in that cage and it's Nikkie or Tico, which does make a lot of sense because they earned a massive amount of money. But also, would they sideline the mole so much? I'm not sure, but Rick's intro at the start may have hinted at them doing that. Because what he said at the start was that everyone does everything to find the mole, the saboteur, and stay in the game. The 4 want the double execution to be with 6 people, but Nikkie and Tico would rather be safe. But the question is whether everyone will forget that there is a mole amongst them. That strongly hints to me that the mole was not amongst them.
Yeah. Anyways, my suspect.
Yeah, I will also give you a little favour, which is I've had a look at the percentages on the app again to see who's actually suspected by the Netherlands. Not that that's very accurate normally. Nikkie is on 31%, Jeroen is on 31%, Peggy is on 21%, and Tico is on 17%.
Right.
So, ironically, it's pretty much a 50-50 split between the two groups on where the mole was. It's 49% in the cage and 52% in the group of 4. Who is your suspect? You get 1, given that we are definitely going to be down to a final 3 by the end of next week.
Jeroen.
I'm obviously going Nikkie. Still, if my gut instinct in week 1 of it being Nikkie was right, I'm going to be so smug.
With Jeroen, the thing that tilted it this time was the fact that he was in possession of the second phone. Patrick was in possession of the phone that he thought was meant for his duo, but Jeroen was in possession of the one meant for the other group, which is, it's tough to really pick out any Moley actions in the past episode and a half, but that was the Moleyest thing. And Jeroen and Peggy were my top 2 suspects. I'm thinking, let's swap them out. Let's put Jeroen as number 1.
I just kind of can't see them pre-season putting Jeroen as the mole. He was such a non-entity in his season. He's not the sort of person you guarantee making it to the end, because that's what it boils down to with the choice, there's two questions in this sort of a season in theory. And it's one, who do you want to see potentially 8 episodes of? And two, who would actually be a good mole and one that would surprise people? And that's why I've constantly been looking at Nikkie this season, because Nikkie is by far the biggest person in this cast in terms of star power generally, but also in terms of following. So you guarantee that all of her followers are going to be watching every episode as a result of her surviving every episode. But also, Nikkie, I think, can definitely sneakily sabotage things from what we saw in Colombia.
Yeah, it's a possibility. Could be Nikkie. Could be Tygo. Could be Peggy.
I'm not sure Nikkie would be the most satisfying mole.
Well, she was sidelined for an episode and a half. No, she's not going to be a satisfying mole.
Given she was sidelined for an episode and a half and she's always in the background doing stuff. But the thing that makes me think it could be her is looking back at who suspected who, because we actually, surprisingly, for potentially a penultimate test here, get a really good indication of who suspects who thanks to this twist. It's the one benefit of this twist. So we had Patrick suspecting Peggy, and he was obviously wrong because he went full ticket on Peggy.
That's another reason why I dropped Peggy down in my suspect list.
Yeah. Peggy suspected Ron, and she was wrong. But obviously we knew that we knew that it wasn't Ron anyway. Ron, we didn't get a concrete suspicion on, but I've been led to believe that he suspected Euron and went straight ticket on Euron. But I might be wrong there.
You never know with Ron.
Yeah, he's the only one we don't get a concrete answer on. And Euron suspected Nikkie. The thing is, going into the next test, Peggy has to change her suspect no matter what. So if Peggy changes her suspect to the mole, then she probably survives the next execution. If she doesn't, she goes home. It could genuinely now end up being, because it's Peggy and Euron, if Euron is still on Nikkie, if Peggy moves to Nikkie as a result of her being the next best suspect or whatever, and goes all in on it, and Tygo, I think, has previously said he's suspecting Nikkie, that means everyone is on Nikkie, and it just is a straight fight between the contestants as to who goes to the final, which is how it really should end. You shouldn't end a mole season with no one knowing who the mole is.
You've been tunnel busy on Nikkie since episode 1.
Yeah, but the thing is, if I'm right about it being Nikkie, you can never make jokes about me being tunnel busied on the wrong person ever again.
Yeah.
I am going big in this season.
So the one thing that they're going to have to do in this next episode is that if the mole was in the cage, whether it be Nikkie and Tygo, they have to really sabotage every single challenge until the end of the game.
Yeah. The other little thing I do have to mention, I know we're massively overrunning what we expected to overrun on this episode, but if you remember a few weeks ago, I talked about someone hypothesizing that we would see everyone's mole apart from the actual mole in the various challenges, because we've seen, I think it was 7 out of the 10 contestants' moles. We obviously weren't going to see Tina's mole because, you know, nobody knew that it was Rob by that point.
Not even Tina knew it was Rob by that point.
Well, yeah, that would have been a massive surprise for her, wouldn't it? If Rob just turned around and went, "Oh, it's you." There's only 2 people whose moles we haven't seen yet in this final 4, and that is Tygo and Nikkie. And we do kind of get a strong hint that it is going to be the final old mole who turns around at the end of the Abby challenge next week. Both of their moles from their original seasons have the same kind of hair color and profile and everything. So if it is one of those 2 people, then you can pretty much go straight ticket on it being the other person who is the mole and that clue being correct. I don't know whether it is. I couldn't tell from the brief glimpse we got of whoever the person with the back to them in the Abby challenge was. But if it is one of the 2 women who it could be, then yeah, it's a pretty strong hint.
Yeah, that one I would probably concede. If Tygo's or Nikkie's old mole turns up, I will concede defeat.
If it isn't one of those 2, though, then it's really weird, the choices of old moles, and we're going to have to discuss that next week. So, thanks to the eliminations this week, Michelle has lost her final candidate in Ron, eliminating her from the competition. I lost Patrick, my first loss of the season, giving me Nikkie and Tygo, and Logan still has Peggy and Euron. It's really interesting that at this point in China, when we got down to the final 4, I had 2 people left and had just lost my first person, and Michelle had 2 people left. And my team contained them all. Just putting that out there now. In the first suspicions list, Tygo is the only person more suspected by us than the group as a whole. Nikkie is now dead even between the two groups on 1.64 out of a possible 3. Logan's team is on an average of 1.59 for everyone apart from the three of us. Mine is on 1.41, and Michelle's is, as a result of her being eliminated, a big fat 0. However, when you add me, you, and Michelle's predictions in, it actually is a dead split between us at 1.5 points each.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know, it's getting twisty now. There are still 9 people who submitted a first suspicions form that have their first suspects left in the game, including both me and Logan. 2 people, me and April Bride 15, have their top 2 left. 6th is the most likely place to have people's suspicions left, with 10 people still having their 6th most likely suspicions left. Only 2 people's 7 suspicions are still left, 1 for Euron and 1 for Tico. So, the final question, before we actually sign off this, who is going to be our 4th placer?
Tygo?
Purely for comedy's sake, I would love it to be Tico, and him actually not being able to get to a final test. It would be just chef's kiss. It would be brilliant. I think it's probably going to be Euron, though. He's definitely been under-edited compared to the other 3. And Nikkie and Tico were stuck in a cage for an episode and a half.
Yeah, it's tough to decipher what's going on with the edit.
My gut feeling, assuming we're going to get absolutely no reveal next week, is that Nikkie is the mole, Peggy is the winner, and Tico is the loser. But it's really difficult to work out actually what's going to happen there.
I don't see Euron being executed next round.
Mainly because he's your mole.
Mainly because he's my mole, yes.
So have you got anything else you want to say? We actually somehow managed to strike out quite a long episode compared to what we were expecting, I think.
No. I think I'm good.
Cool. Thank you for listening to our Vias to Mole Renaissance recap. We'll be back next week to continue the hunt for the newest mole in Italy. Don't forget you can contact us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram, where we are RTV Warriors, or you can email us on contact@rtvwarriors.com. Logan is on Twitter at LogSuperQuacky, and I'm MJ Harmstone. We will also be back on Sunday for the first episode of Amazing Race 32. Thank you, as always, to Marika for the subtitles, and we will see you next week.
Peace out and just chill till the next flavoring.